And we are live. Hello everybody. We're apparently not live on Twitch again because somebody is apparently still hacked into my Twitch account, but that's okay. We're here today with the one and only our Richard, who is very busy because he's in law school and he's accomplishing so many things. But he has agreed to take a break and join us and talk about Richard Nixon because it's something that's so relevant to us right now in case you are still living under a rock. We are in middle of a dispute between Donald Trump's lawyers and several different. What are they suing? They're suing like the polling stations.
They're suing like I guess the state election authorities, and I think that the outcome of those lawsuits, I guess we'll find out. And if there's evidence of voter fraud, it'll come out in those lawsuits. But I think it'll be kind of tough to overturn the results in more than one or two states. I think that's a pretty tall order.
Yeah. I just shared the link online. If you're coming in from Twitter, welcome.
Hey guys.
Yes, what's up? Hey Paul. What up? So some people might be old enough to remember the Nixon versus JFK election. I know very little about our history, but Rick was telling me a little bit about what happened, and it's crazy because it seems like in the olden days it was much easier to commit voter fraud. And speaking of voter fraud, Richard Nixon was probably the most persecuted, you would say, in modern history in terms of a candidate who and it seems to be a lot of like this, like the way he was describing it to me. Sorry, like I'm talking even though I really wanted to ask you what you thought. But like basically from what he's been telling me, like it seems that what happened years ago was basically like the olden time version of what's happening right now, but even more extreme.
It was a lot more rampant and blatant, I think. Because I think this is the thing, like we talk about alternative media now, and there is an alternative to like the big three news networks, but back then it was literally there were 3 television channels and maybe 5 big newspapers that everyone got their news from. Yeah, thanks, Joe. And they would all say the same exact thing. There was no alternative media. There was not even like Fox News or whatever. Like, and I know people now are like on the right don't trust Fox anymore, and like that's a different conversation entirely. But like, there was not anything resembling the right. And the thing is, everyone still
like no one had any choice but to listen to the media.
And so people on the right would just kind of get their news from the same places as people on the left, and just everyone would kind of assume, okay, like this is what the news is. They believed in like objective journalism, TM, which is just a farce. And we know that it's a farce now. But what happened in 1960 was an absolute joke. Like there were no electronic records of anything. It was incredibly easy to, like, there was no need to hack elections. You could literally just stuff the ballots. And when people were talking, like, people now are talking about, like, oh, dead people voted and stuff like that. Well, we have the ability to prove that with records. And you can dispute, like, you know, the accuracy of those records, but the fact is there are procedures in place to make sure that there are, you know, some semblance of accountability with these things. Now, whether or not they're followed is a different question, but the fact that you even have a system for reporting that is such a different thing from these old school elections where literally like Frank Sinatra, the Mafia, and the whole like Daley family, the guy who's the corrupt mayor of Chicago, was able to just register a bunch of dead people
Daley
to vote.
family?
Yeah, Richard Daley was the mayor of Chicago at this time, and he was basically, let me see if I got that right. I think it was Richard Daley.
Yeah, he was the mayor of Chicago.
From 1955 until 1976.
That's what they're talking about when they say ballot stuffing.
Yeah, and then his son was the mayor of Chicago for over 20 years also. Like, these people are, like, just the absolute worst. And
totally corrupt and
blatantly just so totally biased in favor of JFK that entire election. The media, there was no reporting on it. And then not just in Illinois, but in Texas, I mean, the joke was LBJ, they called him Landslide Lyndon because he won a Democratic primary by like 300 votes when he was running for senator the first time. And he was called Landslide Lyndon because everybody knew that he had stuffed the ballots in order to get that 300 vote margin of victory. So, like, if he was willing to do it in his Senate races, what makes you think he didn't do it in 1960? And sure enough, JFK wins Illinois by under 10,000 votes, and he won Texas by a very slim margin also. And if you flip those two states, Nixon would have won.
whoa.
And like,
and it doesn't sound like LBJ or JFK did anything positive that I mean, compared to what people would have gotten under Nixon. I mean, like, growing up, my impression of Nixon, I didn't know anything about politics. All I knew was that Nixon was guilty because of the Watergate scandal. That's all I knew about Richard Nixon. And I think that's what a lot of people think.
right, which wasn't really that big of a deal compared to the stuff that the other guys were doing, like, at all. I mean, when you look at the stuff that JFK and LBJ did, I mean, for one thing, like, JFK flying in hookers and stuff with taxpayer money, and they literally have, like, secret trapdoors and, like, hallways in the White House that were used to sneak in JFK's women.
Do you think Marilyn Monroe was going through those doors?
Probably. I mean, there's this video, I mean, you can find it on YouTube, of her singing Happy Birthday to him, and she's, like, all but, like, sucking his...
Happy birthday, Mr. President.
Happy birthday, Mr. President. And, like, his wife and kids are there. And the media doesn't even think, like, this is a little inappropriate. Nobody comments on this. Because they all knew that he was sleeping with her. Like, and they didn't report it because he was their guy.
Oh my gosh.
Like, it's such a joke. And people talk about, like, you know, you'll hear these, like, liberal boomers at CNN or MSNBC talking about, like, oh, the good old days when objective journalism wasn't questioned and it wasn't just about ratings or profits. It's like, you hacks. Like, the only thing that you can say about that era that made it different was that it wasn't quite as blatant.
Not to mention the policies that they pushed forward.
Like, yeah, I mean...
Like the Social Security stuff and the
modern welfare state was created by LBJ and JFK.
That's insane.
Like, food stamps, the government's heavy-handed involvement in education, at least at the federal level, like Common Core, like, you can trace all that stuff back to LBJ and JFK. Not to mention, like, all these ridiculous programs, the alternative minimum tax, the estate tax, that all comes from LBJ's presidency.
So do you think that possibly the reason why people, like, do you think this is always an issue? The only reason why people are starting to distrust the media and stuff is because now, because of the internet, they have other alternative sources and they have a way of checking the media before the media, it would, like, it's not like it changed. Maybe it's even gotten better, but now the media is able to be checked by the public.
Yes. The fact checkers can be fact checked.
Yeah.
Because, like, say what you want, the fact that they have openness And in part, this is because they got rid of the fairness doctrine, which basically said, like, you need equal airtime for both liberals and conservatives on the radio and on TV news, which Reagan got rid of. You wouldn't have had Fox News, you wouldn't have had alternative media, you wouldn't have had any of that if we had kept the fairness doctrine. And I'm not sure about the history, but I think it was
What's the fairness doctrine?
Basically, it was a law that said if you're going to be using radio or TV broadcasts, you have to have equal coverage to conservative and liberal viewpoints. And so, I mean, it was all determined by some bureaucrat in Washington, so their definition of conservative and liberal was the one that was being used.
Jennifer Rubin.
I don't know who that is.
She's like this really annoying, so she's the Washington Post's conservative, right?
Oh,
She works for the Washington Post, right, guys? So she's like the Washington Post's, and in her bio, I think it says conservative, and she just like totally not conservative in any way other than calling herself conservative. And they have so many of those. They have them at CNN. They have them at like every like liberal media outlet. A lot of, I mean, some of them actually do have conservatives. They're, you know, token conservatives, but there are some like that you're just like, what?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of that kind of thing. And it's not even like a Ben Shapiro or like, it's certainly not like anybody outside the box. But it would be like if your only options for TV news were like Rachel Maddow and this Jennifer Rubin lady. Like those are the two, and they have to give equal airtime to both.
And they're both very cringy.
Yeah.
Like they both have like some sort of, I think each of them has their own version of like a facial disorder. Whatever. Sorry. Joe Anderson says repeal section 430. What's section 430?
So section 430 is basically this like, I thought that was the thing that basically it's a publisher versus platform distinction. Is that what?
Oh yeah, that's what Ted Cruz talks about a lot.
I don't like that because I don't think that Facebook should be responsible for everything that's, you know, posted on their website, because then that basically means Facebook can't exist anymore.
Yeah, but the truth is they're just trying to stop a double standard. They're saying if you're going to be a publisher, then you need to follow by publisher standards. And Facebook and that would de-incentivize Facebook and Twitter from acting as publishers.
I think that they're only doing that right now where they're reviewing and fact-checking Trump's tweets and stuff because the Democrats on the Hill have bullied them so much into saying, because they basically said, what are you going to do?
So Republicans
to
should
protect
bully
our
them back.
They should, but the Republicans, instead of that, they're talking about regulating. Or they're talking about, and they're not nearly they're a lot more timid than the Democrats are in a lot of ways. But the thing is, what I say is the solution should not be regulation, and it shouldn't be the threat of regulation, because when you threaten regulation, that's going to affect their behavior just as much. Like, they, you know, all these Democrats in the 90s, like Joe Lieberman and Carl Levin, were talking about how we need to censor violent video games. And if they don't come up with their own rating system, then we're going to create one for them. And so the video games industry responded by creating a rating system. So like that's a more moderate, you know, a less severe example. But when you're talking about literally like revoking these companies' right to exist, they're scared to death of Elizabeth Warren, and they're not as scared of Ted Cruz. So they're going to censor things in the left-wing perspective, or to the benefit of leftists.
So what should someone like Ted Cruz do? Like what should
get off Twitter?
But
go to Parlor. Like seriously, I mean,
realistically,
even
like,
if they were to
create it's kind of like the whole create your own internet mentality.
You don't need to create your own internet. You don't need to create your own company. You just need to support the people that are working really hard to create their own now. There are tons of conservative alternatives. Like there's BitChute, there's what I just said it, Parlor. There's all these other, you know, alternative social media companies, and like I personally would be on them a lot more if there were a few big figures who even created an account. I mean, my mom is on Parlor now. My mom created a Parlor account.
I mean, I'm on Parlor because of my friends also.
Right.
But I'm just used to Twitter. It's just so hard to like change the platform. I try on Parlor, but like it's just you invested so much in one platform. It's like so hard, and you lose so much time like starting new on a new platform.
I think that the advantage is that you already have this stuff in place. Like, somebody has already put in the effort of creating a system.
So you think Parlor can be just as big?
I think it could get there, but I think that people need to give them a chance. Like, we all complain about Twitter and Facebook all the time, with good reason. But it's like, well, then why do you continue to let them take your data and sell your data? And not just that, but like, why do you put up with it? Like, don't. And you don't have to be on social media. You don't.
These people are on Twitter.
Yeah, I mean, and that's great, but like, you guys should hop on. Yeah, and Paul Nye says, I'm on Parlor. It's okay, but it's so much of an echo chamber. I think that part of the problem there is that, like, I mean, if Trump was to go on to Parlor, I mean, I know Ivanka's on Parlor now.
Trump really should go on Parlor.
He should.
And it's so silly. Sorry, I'm gonna be like, but like, I just feel like Trump has so many people, like especially from in 2016, all these people who like went to bat for him and were like super famous and edgy and like popular and whatever, and he just has so many people, and then he like drops them just to get like, or like he maybe like just bypasses them sometimes in order to like get that like one liberal who's willing to talk to him, or
right.
or willing to, and that one like celebrity figure that is not even going to give him time of day, but maybe like acknowledge him or something.
Right.
And so many Republicans do this where they'll throw away like,
I voted for him because he didn't do that. I voted for him in the primaries in 2016, and I was excited to, not because I loved his platform, not because I thought he was ideologically solid. I voted for him to give a giant middle finger to all these pricks in the media. I'm so sick and tired of it. I mean, going back to Nixon, like, since 60 years ago, they have been in the bag for the Democrats, always. And there was one person who was finally willing to turn the camera back around at the media.
Nixon?
I mean, Trump, yeah. I mean, Nixon did it to a limited extent. I don't think that it was as easy to do that then, because there was such a barrier between the president and, you know, the president's communication with the public was solely through the press.
And they would edit it to like
Right.
make his speeches seem a lot worse than they were.
And now with the alternative media, we were able to break free of that. But Trump, what he did was start communicating directly to the public through social media. And then these like central planners in DC started to get a hold of these companies and basically threaten them and say, if you don't do exactly what we say, we will take your company from you. We will break you up. We will destroy your life's work. So an anti-censorship platform is needed. But the way to do that is by saying, I'm not going to keep putting up with this censorship crap. I'm not going to do it. And I'm not going to give you interviews, Bob Woodward. I'm not going to give you interviews, all you people that are going to censor me.
Why was he so eager to get that interview with Bob Woodward, who like was just like bashing him the entire time? Why doesn't he give it? And
Bob Woodward, not a coincidence, he was one of the people who took down Richard Nixon. He was one of, and proudly so.
Yeah.
And he openly talks about it. And these guys get off to taking Trump down.
That's like how he became famous, right?
Yeah.
That's how Woodward became famous.
Yeah.
I'm sure it played into, I'm sure a part of Trump was thinking like, oh, well, maybe I can change it around. Maybe I can like make him like me.
foolish. Like,
And be my friend.
This guy is a career leftist hack journalist, and you shouldn't give them the time of day.
He's not going to suddenly be your friend. And this is for everybody, every conservative who goes to Washington, D.C., 96% Democrat who goes to Washington, D.C. and thinks, well, I'm going to change these people's mind. They're going to like me because I'll be a little different, right?
Yeah. I mean, look, they've been doing this all along. Like, there was a complete media blackout around Ron Paul. Total blackout. They would not cover him at all. Like, when he won first place in the Iowa caucus in 2012, the story the next day was that Michelle Bachmann won second place. There wasn't a word about how he won.
Whoa.
And, like, say what you want about Ron Paul, and I have my problems with the guy, but he was uncontrovertibly the anti-establishment candidate in that election. And he was probably one of the only people that could have taken down Obama. But they deliberately silenced him by just not mentioning him at all. And it was just this coincidence that all these scandals started to break about how supposedly racists had written some stuff in a newsletter that he had been publishing. That all comes out right before the Iowa caucus when he had been leading in the polls up until that point.
And it's all the people who are not politically aware who believe that stuff.
Yeah.
Before I knew anything about politics, the first time I ever heard Ron Paul's name, I heard it in the same sentence as, like, not racist. I heard it like racist, far right, anti-Semite.
Like, there's some people in that, like, Mises Institute realm that, I'm not saying Mises Institute as a whole is like this, but there's a few people who have said some weird stuff, okay? I think that's, you know, we can go through case by case, but the fact of the matter is that I don't think that something that someone wrote in a newsletter 30, 40 years ago is relevant when you're talking about someone who's running for president now. And it wasn't even like that person who's running for president had written this article. They wrote some stuff that was kind of weird. If I remember correctly, it was like critical of funding, foreign aid funding for Israel, which, like,
that's by no means, like,
no,
that's not controversial.
Like,
I mean, that's
no.
like an opinion that a lot of people who are Jewish or not Jewish have.
I think from a pro-Israel perspective, foreign aid funding for them is bad because it props up their welfare state. Like,
yeah, I agree also.
I mean, I don't believe in foreign aid for anyone.
And I have siblings who live in Israel.
Right. And would Israel is a country with an economy of almost $500 billion. Would they miss the $5 billion in foreign aid that we give them? I don't think so. Especially considering that they spend, like, probably 8 times that on welfare, if not more.
Yeah.
If they stop taxing the crap out of their own people too, that would also help. But
yeah,
whatever. That's a different story.
Yeah.
But anyway, like, and then I think
Israel's government, I think, like, needs to,
yeah,
I don't know.
And I think we were talking about this too. They have the same problem that we do, where the left is very much in charge of the media, right? Like Haaretz and all these, I mean, English language Israeli media that you will see in the United States. I mean, is JPost kind of the same sort of realm?
JPost is like their, like, conservative, like DC conservative type.
Like Wex.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's like the Washington Examiner of Israel. So they're like pro-Likud, but they think that anything further right is, like, bad.
I don't want to say for sure because I don't know.
Fair enough. That's fair enough.
He ironically knows more about Israel politics than I do, even though my family's there.
Yeah, the lamestream media smeared the poop out of Tulsi too. Yeah, I mean, I don't like Tulsi very much. I don't really understand why a lot of right-wing people like her. I think the big thing is that she's anti-war on drugs and she's anti, like, intervention. Foreign wars type stuff, which, okay, cool, but, like, I mean, she's also pretty far left on a lot of these issues too. Like, she's pro single payer and stuff. But yeah, I mean, look, regardless of what I think about her, I do think that they kind of blackballed her in the same way that they did to
Tulsi? Why do they hate Tulsi so much?
Yeah, Tulsi's very anti-gun. I mean, I think it was because she was attacking every single establishment candidate. Like, she was lobbing grenades at Kamala. She was lobbing them at Joe. She was
Kamala's
really...
so unlikable. She's just like...
Yeah, I think that if you wanted,
it's like fake smile.
Yeah, and if you wanted, like, a woman of color... I mean, Tulsi Gabbard is, like, Native American or something, right? She's got...
Yeah.
Yeah, like, I don't know why... And if you wanted to kind of appeal to the people more on the left of the Democratic Party,
they
she
don't
would have
care.
been... No, I mean, but
They
I think
don't
she
care
would have
about
been way
women.
more likable than Kamala the Wine Ant, right?
Yeah, she's more likable. She's less of an establishment figure.
Less of a RoboCop.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I mean... Yeah, she's from Hawaii, so it wouldn't have added much to the map, but Kamala's from California, and they were winning that no matter what. She's Samoan, okay. So, yeah, something. She would have added a little bit of diversity to the ticket if that was the concern.
Sorry. Some last question over here. Jesus said, so what happened in this media action? We can remember what JFK said in his last word.
What happened about the media action? Well, JFK, I don't know about his last words, but, like, I know that, again, JFK was very much, the media was totally in his corner. Like, and the media was against Richard Nixon from day one because he played a leading role in exposing Alger Hiss as a communist agent. And this is a fact. Like, all of the historical evidence confirms that he was a Soviet spy giving information to the Russians, like American intelligence to the Russians, when he worked in the State Department. And because the statutes of limitations had passed to get him for espionage, they asked him on the stand, did you do this? And he perjured himself. So he committed perjury by denying it, and they were able to find the evidence that he had done it. So he served a few years in jail for perjury.
But people now still see him as some kind of hero.
He was a hero for fighting the big, bad, anti-communist McCarthyites. Okay, if you think that the McCarthyites... watch Razor Fist's documentary, Hollywood Was Always Red.
Oh, I'll put it in the link.
Yeah.
I'll put it in the description on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, I'll put it in the description.
You know that if anybody uses the word McCarthyism to smear somebody, they are a hack, and you can't trust their takes on anything.
This one, Hollywood Was Always Red.
Hollywood Was Always Red, a rant. Yeah.
Okay, I'm putting it in the link. I'm copying, pasting it into the description. Into the description of this YouTube video.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little long, but it's not that long. It's like 25, 30 minutes, and he basically goes over how the entire establishment would want you to believe that, oh, these communists, they weren't actually communists, and they were innocent victims persecuted by all these people. No, it's nonsense. McCarthy was a great American, and the only thing that he did wrong was stop. They hated Nixon. Yeah, and Travis is right. They hated him because he earned his way in politics and he wasn't given opportunities because of his connections. He grew up poor, working his butt off. He couldn't go to Harvard because his family couldn't afford it. He actually did get a full ride scholarship to Harvard for undergrad, and he couldn't go because his little brother was dying, and because they needed his help on the farm because his father was sick, and I think his father was a drunk and wasn't pulling his weight, so he basically needed to stay to help his mom and siblings on the farm. Yeah, watch it after this. They
berated him for that. They were did. Like, oh, like this non-Ivy League, like,
they looked down their noses.
Farmer guy, hick, like.
Yeah, and again, Alger Hiss went to Harvard.
It's like now.
JFK went to Harvard. And because Richard Nixon goes to Whittier College, the local college, he would go to school for 8 hours, then he would come home and work on the farm for 8 hours. And he worked his butt off, and he was on the football team in college in order to get a scholarship to pay for that college. So, like, I would say his presidency is a different story. I think he compromised on way too much. But when you look at the man, and you look at what he accomplished in his personal life, he is the American dream. He went to, a local school, which, if I'm not mistaken, I think Whittier College doesn't exist anymore. Then he goes...
I'm going to look it up.
I know their law school closed recently. I don't know about their undergrad, but...
in California?
Yeah. Okay, so maybe they still exist, but I know their law school closed down.
Okay.
Anyway, he goes to Duke Law, which right now, I don't know about back then, but I'm pretty sure like now...
About 70% of the people at Whittier College are Latino.
Interesting. I'm sure that wasn't the case back then, but yeah, he goes to Duke Law School and he graduates near the top of his class, if not the top of his class. He totally earned everything that he had, and they thought, oh, he's stupid. Yeah, he took us off the gold standard. I mean, again, his presidency, there was a lot wrong with what he did. But if you're looking at him as a man, if you're looking at his career holistically, I think that it's pretty difficult to say that he didn't earn everything that he had. And it's pretty difficult, I think, to say that he wasn't, the story. I mean... He loses in a squeaker election because of voter fraud, blatant voter fraud in at least 2 states. And there were another few states that, New Jersey was very close. The Mafia they still kind of control New Jersey in a lot of ways. I wouldn't be surprised if the Mafia put Nixon or put Kennedy over the top in New Jersey. I wouldn't be surprised if they put him over the top in Missouri and Nevada, because Vegas was basically run by the Mafia at the time.
How does the Mafia help rig an election?
So basically the Mafia controlled the labor unions, and they were using the labor unions to launder money. And I could give you a whole spiel, and I would look like that meme of the guy from It's Always Sunny, where I'm just basically, Sam Giancana, Jimmy Hoffa, who was the head of the Teamsters Union, if I'm not mistaken.
Sam Giancana, someone in the, I think Parlor, someone mentioned.
Somebody definitely did, and I forget who it was also, but Frank Sinatra, who was deeply embedded with the Mafia. Basically, all these guys had ties to the Democratic Party, in part because of the labor union stuff, and in part because Kennedy's father was a bootlegger. That's how he made his money, was during Prohibition. And I'm not going to knock him for that. I think that's actually kind of a cool story, is that they made their money through black market booze running in the 1920s and 30s when alcohol was illegal. Now, the things that were associated with that, it was only the Mafia that was running booze at the time because the government made it illegal. So naturally, the criminal underworld is going to take over the supply. So that's basically how he formed these connections with these mafiosos. And, during the New Deal period, a lot of organized labor was increasing in its power because the government at the time was very, very, very pro-union, in part because they knew that a lot of their votes came from union households. So they were very gung-ho on the unions, and basically they rigged the election by saying, you need to vote for this person, in the same way that a lot of...
blackmail.
Kind of, yeah. My great-grandfather was a union rep for the, what do you call it? He was a welder. And so he was in middle management in both the union side and the actual work side. And he had to be completely quiet about being a Republican, because if he were to let it be known that he was a Republican, he would get fired.
Thank you so much, Joe.
Yeah, thank you, Joe.
Joe gave us a thumbs up and a super chat. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, dude. The unions also controlled Mayor Daley. That's correct. He got a lot of his votes, especially from Irish and Italian Catholic voters. Yeah, Daley was intense in Illinois. He basically locked up the convention for the person that became the Democratic nominee most of the time. Kennedy was able to get the nomination in 1960 in part because of Mayor Daley. And Humphrey was able to get the nomination in 1968 in part because of Mayor Daley. He's had his fingers in a lot of pies. And a lot of these guys, they knew they wouldn't get much further than where they were, but they became little kingpins of their own little fiefdoms. And this was before the days of like organized primaries. I mean, they had some, but most delegates at the convention, they weren't selected by primary. They were selected by not a vote from the people, but they were selected by like the politicians in that state controlled the delegates.
It sounds like it was a lot it was a lot easier to be corrupt back in the day.
Yeah. I mean, that's part of the reason why they pushed for these Democratic primaries. I didn't know that. Daley's son apparently also ran Gore's campaign. Was that the son that was also mayor?
Thank you, Ethan.
Yeah, thanks, Ethan. Yeah. But yeah, I mean...
Ethan's watching from Wales.
Oh, that's
UK.
cool. Yeah, I mean, I think that when it comes to these like old school politics, you know, backroom deals and stuff, I mean, obviously it happened on both sides, but the amount, like the sheer vitriol that the press had for Nixon was because he was explicitly anti-communist and he wasn't afraid to go out. And he wasn't even like a radical far right, like he wasn't pushing to get rid of Social Security. He wasn't pushing to get rid of Medicare and Medicaid. He wasn't pushing to, you know, defund, to get rid of the Fed or whatever. And in many ways, he was, I think, like way too, not even moderate, but like center left on a lot of issues. Like he created the EPA and stuff. But, you know, he was anti-communist.
Yeah.
And because he went after some of these leading figures in Hollywood and leading figures in academia, they took it as an assault on their little Ivy League, you know, playground that they had carved out as like a safe haven for communists. Like Alger Hiss. And Alger Hiss got away with lying to the American people.
Do you think they had an Epstein Island back then?
I think it's possible, but I don't think people were as despicable as they are now. Like
Nate Mills says amazing knowledge on the subject, by the way. And sorry for interrupting, but I feel like he's like a walking encyclopedia. You can like ask anything.
Ethan says, thank you for the shout. Unions have vote blocking here. You couldn't get a job if you didn't vote Labour. And I know that like the Labour Party in the UK, like the unions actually get a vote in selecting who the party leader is. They explicitly get a vote. It would be like if the AFL-CIO got like a certain percentage of the delegates at the DNC.
Whoa.
Like it's pretty repugnant.
Wow.
Irwin says his dad, who's a Teamster, tells a story that Al Capone wanted him to be his driver. See, that's pretty cool. You know what they finally got Al Capone for?
What?
It wasn't any of the gun running. It wasn't any of the organized crime. It was tax fraud.
That's so funny. That's kind of like crazy though. Like...
Do you know that if you put like I made this money from drug running on your tax returns, they can't use that as evidence to prosecute you?
Why?
I think the idea is they just, you know, they would rather that you report your income so that they can take a piece. Then
crazy.
Yeah.
So there really isn't justice. I mean, that's not the goal. The goal isn't justice. The goal is like taking your money as much as possible.
Yeah. Jesus says, here in Mexico, the media wants to tell us what to say about the nomination of Joe Biden. The president of Mexico declares we should wait until the official result.
Oh, interesting.
I mean, yeah, the president of Mexico, it's kind of funny. They, like, apparently, you would think, because he's basically like the anti-immigrant side of Donald Trump combined with like the domestic policy of Bernie Sanders.
Interesting.
He's like a weird socialist populist, but he's gotten along
he's like a right-wing socialist, right? Kind of.
He's gotten along very well with Trump though, which is funny. Like I mean, I think at least on a personal level they get along.
That's interesting.
Yeah, probably because they're both kind of similar personalities. But and if I understand things correctly, Jesus can correct me if I'm wrong, but like the media was pretty anti-AMLO.
What's Amlo?
The president. It's like I think his name is like Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador. So they just call him AMLO for short.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway.
What's Mexico's media like? Are they as intense as ours?
My Spanish is not fantastic, but what I've gotten from a lot of their mainstream outlets is it seems to be kind of like center, like neoliberal-ish. So they don't really like AMLO that much because he's too far left for them, but like they don't like Trump. They don't like they probably wouldn't like somebody who's too right-wing. They're kind of like, what's the word? Like the anti-Bernie people at like CNN and stuff.
Like established, like center Democrats?
Yeah, like center Democrats and maybe like old school Fox News, like Bill O'Reilly, who would kind of like make jabs at the Tea Party for being too right-wing.
Okay.
They're very like comfortable in that sort of centrist, like elitist kind of bubble.
Yeah.
They're like pro-NAFTA, like anti. This is my impression, and I've only read like a few mainstream sources, and I don't read regularly Mexican news, but that's my impression.
So, as I've asked you like every single day since the election, is Trump, like, could Trump become the president? Like, because, I mean...
I think there's a lot going against that.
What if the court finds that there was voter fraud?
We'll find out, yeah. I mean, we'll see.
And it was enough voter fraud to have made a difference. Wasn't Al Gore president for like a few days or something?
Well, so they had him in the lead, but then they... like it went back and forth between him and Bush, and they basically kept fighting it out in the courts until like, I want to say like early December, when the Supreme Court said like, but the thing is like people are comparing it to 2000, but in order to flip this election, we would need much more than we had in 2000, which was all they had to do was tell Florida to stop the recount, because, you know, according to Florida election law, the ballots had to be finished being counted by a certain date. And they were like, well, it's past that date, like, you're done. Okay. I mean, that's fair to me because, again, the law is what the law is. So, you know, the Constitution explicitly says the state legislatures get to decide who, you know, what the law is with regards to when the counting stops. And if they violate that law, like, tough noogies, the Supreme Court doesn't get to rewrite the law. So the difference here would be they would have to invalidate like tens of thousands of votes in Pennsylvania. Now, it's difficult to do that because there's many counties in Pennsylvania that have basically commingled all the different mail-in ballots, including the ones that came in late. And according to state law, they're not supposed to be counted after this time. They've commingled those ballots with ballots that were cast on election day, with ballots that were mailed in, you know, before the deadline. And so it's going to make it kind of difficult to do a proper recount.
But if they had, like, if there's a chance that voter fraud occurred, they have no choice. And also, apparently, it's, like, easier for it's Pennsylvania's system isn't that foolproof.
I do think that it's really freaking dumb the way that these MSM like people are not covering the fact that like the electoral system, the voting systems in Florida after the year 2000 and after that whole debacle, like, say what you will about Florida, before that they got their crap in gear afterwards. They totally overhauled their election system. They were counting the mail-in ballots before election day. You know, the ones that arrived before election day, they started to count, which is what they should have done in Pennsylvania and Arizona. That's not what happened. So if you guys remember, like, Trump was originally down, I think, like 600,000 votes in Florida. like a couple weeks before election day, and then, you know, as it got closer and closer to election day, the gap started to narrow, and then on election night it flipped, and then Trump won. So, but they had their votes counted on election night. It was done. Now, the problem with states like Pennsylvania and Arizona, Pennsylvania is run by Democrat governor right now. Arizona's got a Republican governor. So it's not even a partisan thing per se. It's that, like, they have these antiquated, outdated voting systems that need to change. Like, and that shouldn't be a partisan thing. They need to overhaul their voting system because it's a clusterfuck to not have, It's an absolute cluster to not have the proper systems in place so that you can get the result, especially if you know your state is going to be a close one and you know that your state is going to have like one of the swing states in 2020. Wisconsin, I mean, at least they had their votes counted a day or two after the election, but like, I think they should modernize their system too. Michigan, same thing. Because didn't it take like 2 or 3 days before they had their stuff decided?
Yeah, it took a while.
So, I mean, right now though, Pennsylvania is the biggest one. That's just a total cluster. And then I think to a lesser extent, Georgia and Arizona, right? Like they're still technically undecided.
Yeah.
Although Arizona, they already called, but the gap keeps narrowing. And I think they just don't want to admit that they have egg on their face and they shouldn't have called it that soon.
You know what else is annoying about the mainstream media? They, in 2016, and actually all through, like literally all through recently, the whole narrative was that Russia hacked our election. Russia hacked the 2016 election, and that's how Trump won. And then suddenly it switched to like, oh, it's impossible to hack an election. Voter fraud is nearly impossible. It's so... And all these, every time you go on Twitter, anytime you tweet something that has anything to do with the election or voter fraud, I'm sure it says it in this YouTube description right now. Go look under and it says something about... It says this thing about how it's impossible to hack an election or it's impossible to commit voter fraud, and every time you want to like retweet something about voter fraud on Twitter, you'll see like a notification pop up that says voter fraud is impossible, but they didn't think that before the election. They didn't.
Yeah.
And all from 2016.
So Wally says how many states are over 100% of their registered voters. I've looked into this, and apparently there's a lot of states. If you look at the numbers before election day, yes, there were more voters than there were registered voters like a week before election day. But if you like, there's a lot of states.
How's that possible?
Because there's a lot of states that have same-day voter registration, which means if you show up to the polls on election day and say, "Can I please register to vote now?" And I've done that. I did that in California, and it helped me.
I did that in 2016.
Right. And it tends to be the more liberal states that allow that. So, I mean, whatever you might think, like, I personally think that it's not mutually exclusive to say we should have transparent voting systems and we should make sure that there's no fraud, but at the same time, we can make it easier for people to vote. And it shouldn't be like a partisan thing to say both of those things. Like, we should have like very strict guidelines in place to make sure that there's no cheating and there's no hacking and there's no fraud. But at the same time, I was kind of disappointed that we couldn't register here in Texas.
Yeah, it's so hard.
You have to register over a month before election day in Texas.
Yeah.
And I wanted to register to vote here because this is my home now.
You have to have registered before like October.
Yeah. So.
Or by early October or something like that.
Yeah. Like, I personally like the idea of being able to, because we can
vote in 2 years, right?
Yeah, I think we should probably get on that for residency purposes, because I don't want to pay income taxes to California. I hate that state. I'm gone. Like, that was my home. This is my home now. And I plan on starting a life here. I plan on starting a family here. I plan on starting my career here. And California deserves none of my money because they haven't benefited me at all. Like, bye. Like,
yeah, good.
I mean, I I will say that, like, technically I am a legal resident of California right now, so I have to look more into the how everything works, because I am, like, for all intents and purposes, I'm registered to vote there. I have a California driver's license. Like, I believe that I would still have to pay California taxes if I were to get a job right now. So I need to look into the specifics of that. But yeah. Thank you, Mark. Congratulations on that family plan. I mean, we live in a very competitive district too in Texas. I mean, my home district in California is also kind of competitive. So I was thinking about that. But ultimately, I mean, it was too late for us to register here. So I just decided to keep my absentee ballot from California and vote there.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because it's still just the beginning. You still are not. You're still a Californian technically.
Yes.
Even though we're
For
like
legal reasons, I am a California resident.
Yeah, because I
For
mean,
now.
yeah, it's just we're still transitioning. Our stuff are still partially in boxes, very partially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We don't have to pan around, but we could if you want.
Not yet.
Okay.
I'm thinking of doing. Should I do it in like a video?
Yeah, we can.
And so I don't know. The thing is, like, I feel like people enjoy these live streams more than they enjoy those edited videos. Like they do some you know. And if you haven't watched my last video about going off the derech, it's about if you're religious in any way or you're interested in religion or whatever, like, go watch it. I don't know, it's interesting, and Rosemary's on there. But anyway.
Yeah. TJ says don't ruin Texas. We're here to save Texas.
We're here to save Texas.
We're here to, like, keep Texas great. Like, we came here as refugees from California. We love that it's a lot more free and dynamic here. I mean, there's a few things like occupational licensing and regulations that should be like, we want to make the Republicans better here. We want to keep their feet to the fire and make sure that things not only stay as good as they are, but get even better.
Because California used to be like how Texas is now, right?
Yeah.
Like California used to be...
California was where everybody went if they wanted a cheap alternative to the East Coast. I mean, it was a more
and
conservative
where they wanted
place.
to make money and start a business and all these things. I
mean, living in Encino in the 1970s and 80s, that was like living in Plano, Texas now. Or living in, you know, what's another suburb of, like, the Dallas area? Like
Heath?
Heath, yeah. Like, you know, somewhat bougie and nice and stuff, but not so ridiculously expensive. Somebody claiming asylum in Texas. Nice, Nate. Thoughts on the 1948 election? Do you think Thomas Dewey had the election stolen from? George, that's an interesting question. I'm not as familiar with the 1948 election, and frankly, I don't like Dewey very much. Like, I don't have a lot of sympathy for him. He's one of these, like, New Deal Republicans that just kind of, like Ayn Rand said, she had a phrase, me tooing. Like, basically, when the Republicans would just say, oh, I'm also for all this increased government intervention and all these new taxes and all these new welfare programs. Like, me too. Like, I don't like that whole generation of Republicans that also ran against FDR, you know?
Yeah.
But it's interesting. Like, I think it's possible. I haven't looked very much into it, though.
Joe says more videos. Is that what you're talking about? Okay.
No more.
Oh, not no more.
So Joe Rogan followed you.
No, so he's saying Joe Rogan followed us because Joe Rogan also moved to Texas.
Yeah,
and there
he came after us.
Yeah, he came. Yeah, he did technically come after us.
Yeah.
And there is a lot of people because we came a little bit earlier than this video.
Yeah.
Was put out. Then I announced it because there was like a whole bunch of stuff that had to happen first. But also, there's a lot of people who are like either business people, like Tesla moved one of their plants here, but also there's a lot of like media people, like independent media people, like Joe Rogan and Casey Neistat, and the whole, like, there's so many conservative, like, people that are on YouTube that moved here.
Yeah.
And it just keeps coming. Like, people just keep moving, like, it's like the artists and the creators and all that.
Mark says because some say lots of Californians run to Texas but bring along the bad habit of voting blue. I'm actually looking at the Dallas Morning News, and according to this exit poll, which you might have seen on the Ben Shapiro show, native Texans voted for Beto O'Rourke over Ted Cruz in 2018 by a very slim margin, but it was 51% voted for Beto versus 48% for Ted Cruz among people that were born in Texas.
Interesting.
Now, for people that moved to Texas, 57% voted for Ted Cruz and only 42% for Beto O'Rourke, which means Ted Cruz would have lost the election if only people from Texas had voted.
It means that we're saving Texas.
Yeah.
Like you think that the Californians I thought the Californians were coming here and turning Texas blue, but it's the other way around. The Californians are coming here and saving Texas because the Californians are coming here because they're trying to escape, socialism.
I think that the opposite is happening too, where a lot of Democrats from Texas are moving to California because that's where they want to be and they want to live in their $1 billion shoebox apartments, and good luck to them. I'll let that let the place crash and burn though. I'm not going down with the ship.
And the people who live in California, like my parents' neighbors, I've been talking to a lot of my parents' neighbors in California who've been living there for decades and have businesses there and everything. A lot of old Democrats are now voting Republican in California. So it's like the reverse happening with the reverse of Texas, where the longtime Californians are suddenly now voting red, and then the newcomers are voting blue.
Yeah. I mean, I think that people
they're closet conservatives. They're not very loud.
Yeah, and I'm not even just to rely on polls, but anecdotally, people that we know are leaving California and they're moving somewhere else. And I do think people ultimately vote with their feet. If you allow states to kind of do their own thing to a certain extent, at least, the states will implement different policies, and ultimately people will gravitate to the states that align more with their values. Yeah. And I think in our case, that's Texas. I think
a lot of people we know a lot of people going to Florida.
I would argue that the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, is the best governor in the United States right now, as far as I'm aware. Unless somebody can point me to somebody better, I haven't seen any evidence, because he is... Florida is the best run state in the country.
My brother just married a girl from Florida, and he wants to stay there.
Yes.
He loves Florida.
I believe that a lot of people in your family's community, it's difficult for them to move because they grow up and they have certain needs that a lot of other people don't, with regards to
religious stuff.
Right. But there are communities that are growing, even here in Texas, which you wouldn't maybe assume, but I know in Miami, their community is probably one of the bigger ones outside California and New York. Would you say it's the biggest outside of California and New York? The Miami community?
No, there's a big one in Baltimore.
Okay.
The one in Miami is very diverse. It's kind of like LA, where it's diverse.
They seem very nice and friendly.
Yeah.
Not saying the other ones aren't, but in particular, they're very
friendly.
Yeah. I mean, and they leave you alone. They do their own thing. That's the thing I like about.
And they're more cohesive.
Right.
They're more they're less uptight and pretentious.
Very family oriented. Yeah. I mean, that's for all of them, but I think with a lot of these religious folk, especially in these tight-knit communities, they're having 5, 6, 7 kids, and they're pro-children. You were telling me about the Israeli airlines that they have activities for the children.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's a long flight, but as a kid, I never was on a plane that was explicitly geared towards kids in that way. And I think that is such a positive sign.
And usually it's the opposite.
Right.
People are always complaining ew, get your...
In the secular world, yeah. And it's even non-religious Israelis are, having a couple of kids, and they tend to have young, cute, families. They're really, I think, when a culture is resentful towards children and you give your dog better treatment than you give your kids,
Yeah.
you know, and you probably have only 1 or 2 kids and you have like 1 million dogs and you bring them everywhere with you and maybe you don't even have any kids. When you're anti-kid, you're anti-life. I'm sorry. Like, and I'm not saying like there might be some people that don't want kids even, but like you can make that decision for yourself. But when you say like, I hate kids, kids are awful. Like I think that's a sign that the culture is declining. Because if people don't want kids, that means in a lot of ways, they're probably not feeling very good about the future. They're not optimistic. They think that tomorrow is going to be worse than today.
Yeah.
Whereas in these cultures that are very, you know, welcoming to children and very like geared towards, it's young and it's energetic. There's a certain, I mean, your mom, she's not old, but she's a grandma and she runs around with the baby in a way that she probably didn't do before.
She lost weight. My mom lost weight ever since like she started hanging out with my niece, and she's like, and my niece started like walking, and she's just like chasing after her and everything.
Okay. Yeah, that's awesome to me. Yeah. And I see it. I mean, she's like a little kid playing with
my grandma
kid.
Also.
Your grandma who, you know, she's a bit older, but she's still able to run around with the kid.
Yeah.
And that's really cool. Your niece is cute.
Yes, she's really cute.
And your sister's cute with her too. Yeah. They're like friends.
Yeah, so I have my youngest sister they're not my youngest sister hangs out a lot with my baby niece.
They're close enough in age where it's like it's almost like a big sister little sister dynamic,
and she takes her out with her friends, like if she's going to her friend's house or whatever, she'll take her.
Yeah. They're like what, 12 years apart? Like 2 and
14?
2 and 14, yeah. Right?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
For many, it's not the actual kids, but I agree, and part of the problem is that the middle class is being squeezed so hard by all these ridiculous taxes that it's very hard, and not to mention all the regulations and stuff around, like, anything to do with having a kid, and, you know, the cost of education, especially if you don't want to deal with government schools.
The cost of everything.
Cost of housing. I mean, but for you people who are on the coasts that, like, if you can think about leaving, like, just look at Zillow.
We see kids here. We see
a lot of kids here. We see a lot of young families. And, I mean, just take a look. Like, I'm not saying commit to anything, but, like, just look at the real estate listings a little bit and think, like, start to crunch the numbers just as a thought experiment. Like, how much would the down payment be? How much would the mortgage be? Don't think about the number that's like, oh, it's $250,000. Think like, okay, what's a 20% down payment? And then how much would the monthly mortgage be? It's or probably less than your rent.
Even lower down payment depending on what kind of loan you can get.
Yeah.
If you can get like a first-time home buyer loan, like an FHA loan.
Right. The down payment might be less than a deposit.
3.5%.
On an apartment in Los Angeles. That's what I'm just saying.
I've met very young people in Texas who own multiple properties, their own properties.
Yeah, young people younger than us. Like, it's pretty cool.
And they're like settled. They can get married, have kids, like start life.
Yeah. Mark said that British Airways has activities for kids. I didn't know that. That's kind of cool. Best governor is in Florida, no doubt.
So Holden says is Kristi Noem.
Kristi Noem.
South Dakota governor.
We were looking up some stuff about her when she was a congresswoman, and it was a little iffy, her record. But, I mean, well, so we were looking at it, and basically she was looking at, like, a really milquetoast, like, compromise on Obamacare. And she was putting that forward. Like, I forget the specifics, but basically she would have left the pre-existing conditions and the staying on your parents' plan until you're 26, but then, like, getting rid of some other stuff, which is, like, kind of maybe better than the current bill, but, like, maybe
she changed. Maybe she changed.
I mean, as a governor, I think she's done a pretty good job, I will say. But as a congresswoman, I think her record is kind of mixed. Something I'm going to look into a little more. y'all in a fantasy. We're already in lost election. There is no trust from here on out.
Don't be a pessimist.
Don't be a black pill.
Don't be a black pill.
And honestly, remember all the rage that you have now.
Use
and then
it.
come out to like organize now. Don't just show up to vote in 2 years, but you should do that. But like, remember how you felt when they lied to you. Like, remember how you felt on election night when he won Florida by 5 points and they had been telling you he would lose it by 8. They are full of it and we won't be fooled again. Like, don't allow them to keep you down, and don't allow them to spin their narrative because they've been spinning the same crock for the past 80 years.
But they can't anymore because we have more transparency than we did in the olden days because we have the internet, and no matter how much these...
Stop giving them your money.
Yeah.
Stop giving them your clicks. Don't do it.
Well, they have to in order to watch this video.
No, I'm saying don't give them clicks on their news sites. Don't give CNN clicks. Don't give MSNBC clicks. Don't give NBC clicks. If you're going to give them, if you want to read their articles, do it on like a VPN using the private browser so that they don't get monetization from it. Like, no.
Yeah, like, and eventually, eventually the internet is going to be, I could see everything just being decentralized. I mean, there's Parlor. If you didn't hear us talking about Parlor earlier in the stream, go over to the description. You'll see my Parlor account. There's BitChute for videos. There's and you know what? Like, the more you give power to these up and coming other tech outlets, big giant tech outlets like Facebook and Twitter are gonna be forced to start acting fairly also. Travis John says, I'm bummed about the presidential election, but very good to see my rep Stefanik beat down Tedra Cobb despite the media shilling for her.
I think this election is a sign that people on the right are not going away. There were 8 million more votes for Trump this year than there were in 2016. I think the lesson here is that if the media was not pushing against him every single possible turn, he would have walked away with it. You would have looked at probably an election landslide unlike any since the 1980s. Now, I'm not super pro-Trump. I mean, you guys can hate on me in the comments.
And he's not saying that to be like, ooh, no.
I'm not like, he. No, I think that he betrayed his base. Yeah. I am his base. Like, I was out there, like, in the streets campaigning for him in 2016.
He doesn't care. Yeah.
I was excited about somebody giving them a giant black eye to the media. And I think whatever you do say about him, that is his lasting contribution to America, is he finally turned the camera around. And don't forget, just because he lost, don't forget what they did. Don't forget how much they lie. Don't think that this is going away. Don't think that they're going to shape up because, they defeated Blumph.
They won't, but they won't, but they will have less power.
I think they will.
They'll have less power.
It's never going to go back. You can't put that genie back in the bottle.
People like us have a platform now.
Yeah.
They didn't in the olden days.
Yeah, and I think the fact is, I think that YouTube continues to be the best. And I know that there's problems with YouTube too, but they are much more responsive, I think, than Twitter.
I like
and
YouTube.
Facebook and all these other creeps. Instagram.
They'll do annoying things, but they
don't outright silence you.
They do for a lot of people, but it depends.
I think to get deplatformed off of YouTube, you have to do something that's really explicit. You have to be talking about the Jews or something.
Yeah.
And even that,
they
like,
respond to that.
but even that, I think, like, there's still some people that don't. I mean, I don't
Yeah,
know
now
as
that I
much.
think about it, yeah.
I mean, like, Owen Benjamin's still on here.
Yeah, Owen Benjamin's still here.
I'm not saying that they don't demonetize, but, like, they're not shutting you up. I think that's the worst.
If it was Facebook, like, even at the very, very start, they would have shut him down. They would have shut down everybody.
Yeah.
I mean, they do. I don't even go on Facebook.
No.
I have a Facebook account. I've got a lot of friends on Facebook. I don't check my Facebook.
I do it for DMs, but that's about it. Biden campaign of lies find people hoax, Irwin says. Demonetizing is an effective way of silencing, says Mark. I mean, I don't know if it's... I think that with YouTube, like, from, like, thinking of it from their perspective, and I'm sorry if I garner a lot of hate from what I'm about to say. Sorry to you.
Whoa.
I do think that YouTube, like, they're a company. They're trying to make money, right? And so I don't even think it's them. I think it's pressure from their advertisers who say we don't want to monetize your, we don't want to advertise on YouTube at all if our ads are put on this person's video. Like what they did to PewDiePie and the adpocalypse and all that nonsense. But that's just gun-shy boomers who are really scared of all this backlash from the left. If you want change, write emails, write letters to the editor. Like, I know that it sounds like a lot of work, and that's because it is, but like, until we start taking this stuff seriously the way that the left does, where they're engaging in keyboard warrior activism at the same level that they are, we are not going to stop losing. And look, I blame, like, my great-grandparents for surrendering these institutions. I blame them for not fighting for Hollywood. I blame them for not fighting for the media. I blame them for not fighting for universities. I blame them for not fighting for just the culture broadly, for art that doesn't suck, for movies that aren't just leftist trash, right? And I mean, now we have to live in the world that they created, but that doesn't mean that we just have to accept it. Don't just go down without fighting for what you believe in. And if you get irritated, like, it starts at the local level. If they're trying to shove this stupid, like, Marxist nonsense, like they're trying to teach your kids the Crucible in high school, which is basically perpetuating this myth of McCarthyism, go to your local school board. That's where you can make a difference.
Yeah.
And your voice is going to be heard.
Democrats are much more likely to do that, though.
That's just it. But
it's just part of the culture. They're
right.
way more engaged in that kind.
They're more Karen-y.
They're more, yeah. They're more into, like, controlling people.
But, like, get some of that, like, Karen, like, I need to speak to the manager energy, guys. Seriously. Like, if you don't do that, then this is going to keep happening. Exactly. Like, speak up.
Exactly.
That's what Irwin says.
Yes, and sorry, just to clarify, so TJ says Owen Benjamin ain't on here anymore.
Was he deplatformed in the last day or two? Because you were listening to his stream a little while ago.
I was watching a stream yesterday, but it might be that because the thing is that, like, so I used to watch his live streams. They're just very entertaining. They're, like, crazy and funny. And then they, like, and they're very offensive. And they, like, deplatformed one of his videos. I think they deplatformed his main channel. I think that's what it is. And then, so now this is, like, a different account that he uses. It's like, it's not Owen Benjamin anymore. It's Owen Benjamin Archives.
Interesting.
So I think they just, like, keep I think he just has to keep, like, they keep deplatforming his channel, so he keeps making new ones.
Interesting. Okay.
So I don't know, but yes, that's it. And you have to get to studying.
I should probably start to work.
So what's last? Thanks so much, by the way, everybody, for joining. Any last words about Richard Nixon and JFK?
Kennedy was a commie and Nixon was framed.
Yeah, Kennedy was a commie and Nixon would frame, and maybe people didn't talk about it enough. Maybe now is the time for people to start talking more about it, because it's a big part of our history that is very relevant right now, and if we don't pay attention, then we might repeat the same things over and over and over again.
Don't let them win.
Don't let them win. And you can do that by liking my video.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And support her on Patreon or on
Super Chats.
Super Chats.
Joe Anderson is like
Thanks,
the
Joe.
Yeah,
Heck
thank
yeah.
you. And thanks everybody for joining us here and for making these live streams so much fun. And see you all on the next stream. I'm gonna try and do them as like regularly as possible, and most likely you'll see these in like the late afternoons, like how we did today. So yes, see you guys in the next live stream, and talk to you later.
Where did we meet? That's a story for...
I made a video.
Oh, yeah.
I made a video about it. So I'm gonna put the video in the description.